I'm primarily a metalsmith. That's my training, that's my background, that's how, I intended to make my living, and that's in fact how I have made my living. My career has been all over the map. I made a lot of jewelry in my lifetime, so jewelry was an important part of the metal work I did. I don't do any commission work anymore, and I don't do any design work for jewelry anymore. The jewelry I make is for friends, family, birthdays, and significant events in life that have to be marked in some important way. So I love to make the stuff, and I think I've made some nice jewelry, but I'm not in love with jewelry making. I love process. It's hard sometimes to push yourself out of the comfort zone. You have to be willing to use the techniques that you have, and you have quite a repertoire there, in a way that gets the job done.
Oh, there's a break in the side, Dad. It's pouring out. You're not going to get a complete pour on this.
I've found that many who work in the area of crafts and become incredibly proficient at what they do tend to want to demonstrate that in the work they do. And so sometimes there's a tendency to overmake, to put too much into something. It's been a real pleasure for me to go up in scale, not only because it's just more comfortable as a way to work now, but pieces that might seem to sculptors to be quite small, the things I make now are for me huge relative to the work I've been doing for most of my life. When I consider a piece of sculpture now, a larger piece, I'm really trying to come to some core idea that has some meaning to me and try to represent it in a cleaner, more concise way, I guess I would say. And some of these pieces I'm working on now, again, it's not so much about the metal, it's really about the forms and the shapes. I really don't like to feel that I'm obligated to the metal in a particular way, that I'm obligated to put a beautiful green patina on something because it's metal and I have to honor that. I think you can honor that material in other ways.
Oh
no! We're looking at failure number 2 here. Trying to pour 70 pounds of metal into this mold. I tend not to fall in love with one process or one way of making something or coloring something. There's a real desire I have to explore and move away sometimes from the things I become comfortable with. These forms could be made out of wood, they could be made out of plastic, they could be made out of lots of things. I happen to be a metalsmith, so and I'm pretty good at making these forms in metal, so that's how I do it. And there is an issue with gouache, which is the paint I've been using. Gouache is unforgiving when it's applied to a substrate that breathes. And so metal works really well with it. And the color that I'm using now is this very dense, very intense, very opaque color that I first came to appreciate on my trips to Mexico and Oaxaca down there. Walking into that plaza and looking around, and it was early evening, and the geometries and the shadows and the colors were just so gorgeous. They were so beautiful and so clean. It just triggered a desire in me to somehow find a way to capture something there that hit me on a gut level, I guess you would say. This is a mock-up. It's a combination of paper and cardboard. There's a wooden frame here. You can see on the back some of the construction. These neon green tubes here go right through that back metal form, and they're going to be bolted into place. That's the basis of the structure. These are added on, will be added in and applied to the surface of this mat, this wooden mat or frame that I have. But these will be constructed out of metal, and they do refer to, again, on these trips to Mexico, you see them all over the countryside. Very often there's a shrine that's constructed, and that shrine will represent a person's life or a part of their life. And I was always intrigued with the meaning of these things. These painted pieces are all fabricated. The process of fabrication is basically starting with flat sheet metal and manipulating that metal to create a form. When you use a hammer or you use a press, you're stretching the material. And then there's a refinement process that generally happens after you've got your form roughed out with your hammers and stakes and so on. And teaching, I've been teaching adjunct for 20 years at RISD, and so that's been a wonderfully enriching experience for me. It's just as fresh and just as interesting for me every year. All right, third pour. Hopefully third time's a charm. We got a nice fill all the way to the top, and the approach this time was very different. Instead of pouring straight down in, standing straight up, we approached this in the way that you would pour a sand mold. Well, there's a tremendous amount of learning. I mean, as I've said, I've never done this before. My father used to do this in the backyard, but he used to do this on a much smaller scale. And what I didn't understand was that, you know, at some point, using this very crude sort of backyard methodology here, you know, you hit critical mass with the technique, and you know, we had a blowout both times, first two times we did it. So we solved those problems. We solved a lot of problems this time. We don't know yet what we're going to get when we crack this thing open, but I really do enjoy, you know, a challenge like this. And so if this works out, it's just going to be a great day. It's not a spontaneous process. My sister and I were laughing about this the other day. We work very differently, but the one way in which we work very much the same is that we're slowpokes. It takes us a long time to get to some kind of resolution that feels good. There are times when I'm really quite envious of the glass blowers of the world and the potters. There isn't much in the realm of metalworking that allows that kind of freedom and that kind of expression. I guess the closest you could get would be working with clay and developing texture, and then working with molds, and it's a whole other way of work. I mean, I'm always interested to know the details of how things are made and the historical context that accompanies pieces and works. But there's something also really interesting about that first moment when you see something. And if it informs you in some way that is new and interesting, then I think, you know, there's some real success there. And I think that's really what art's about. Yeah. So this will work.
Well, good for you. Don't go into the nitty-gritties, you got it.
My father, my mother, life was all about art. Art and music and great food and great friends. There was nothing more important in life than those things. So I do feel some sense of responsibility to that heritage. It's embedded in me, so it's easy. But, you know, I think we play to that audience. You know, there are people who are long gone in my life who, when I finish a painting or a piece of work that I feel good about, one of the first things that comes to mind is, how would my father have felt about this? Or how would Ronnie Pearson, the man I apprenticed with for 3 years up in Maine, who I loved, or Hans Christensen, another great teacher, or Albert Paley, these wonderfully important, interesting artists who've been in my life. And I want to make them proud, you know.